Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Suggs, developer at SmartLogic.
And I'm Owen Bickford, staff engineer at SmartLogic.
And I'm AJ from Marketcircle.
Welcome, AJ. So we're your hosts for episode 8. We're joined by Alykhan Jetha, or AJ, the CEO/CTO of Marketcircle. And we'll be talking about Marketcircle, the company, some of the products you have there. But welcome to the show, AJ.
Nice to be on. Thank you.
Before we start talking business and about Marketcircle, the company, can you tell us a little bit about AJ, the person?
Where shall I start? So I live in Canada, just outside of Toronto, and I have 2 kids. I'm married and 2 kids. My son's 20, my daughter's 17, which, means certain kinds of challenges. I've been here in Canada since 1982. I was born in the Congo, and we emigrated here as refugees, actually. And we built our new life over here in Canada. And so in 1999, I started the company, Marketcircle. It wasn't what you see today. It was very different. We had to pivot a number of times. But that's in a nutshell me.
1990, is that what you said?
That we started the company in 1999.
99, okay. All right, so it's been around, but not, I was like, it's a long time to be in software.
It is a long time to be in software, and there's definitely some battle scars to share on that one.
I'm sure.
It's a quarter century.
Yeah, we're approaching that number. Well, again, we pivoted many times. So,
Sure. Yeah.
But the quarter century is about right. And I try to not think about that. I try to think I'm just brand new and, ready to go.
That's like millennia of software. Things move so quickly here.
It is a millennia of software. A software generation is 5 years, So
sounds right.
Mm-hmm.
Used to be 10, but now it's 5.
Right. Well, okay. So Marketcircle founded 1999, and you say it pivoted a few times since then. What was the initial vision? And then can you walk us through the short, maybe abbreviated timeline of where you started and where you're at now?
So we started as a quote unquote .com, and the idea was, think of eBay, right? But instead of auctions, negotiation. So you'd put something up for sale and you'd say, this is my asking price, and people can make you an offer and you can go back and forth and negotiate on that price. So that was the idea of the product or company at the time. We built a prototype. It was working. We had some people. We had some exchanges, and I tried to raise money. And by the time I got to, Silicon Valley and the VCs there, I was there when the .com explosion happened, or implosion, or whatever we want to call that. And so I was swiftly booted out, and we had to come back, pivot, and decide whether we wanted to close the company or continue on. But we had borrowed some money, so we thought the ethical thing to do would be to pay that back. And how would we do that? With consulting. So we did consulting for a while. And as we were doing consulting, we were like, well, how are we going to manage our clients and all this kind of stuff? And it was either making your own or switching to Windows, because even back then we were on Mac OS or Mac OS Rhapsody or whatever that was called. I originally started in software in the Next days. So my very first job was coding on Next computers, which evolved into what Mac OS is now. So right. I was always in that space. And so we decided, well, you know what, we'll just make our own rather than switch to Windows and use one of those gold mines or Act or any one of those things. So that's how Daylite was born, the main product that we are known for now. It was born out of our own need. So we did consulting for a while. Then we got convinced by Apple actually to sell what we built as a product. And I was convinced. We turned it into a product and we started selling Daylite. And it took many years for us to be able to replace our consulting revenue with Daylite revenue. We were transitioning into a product company, but a licensed on-premise kind of product company. And then finally, at some point, we decided that, we got to move to the cloud. And it was more about the decision that we had to make there was more about, okay, well, exactly how do we want to move to the cloud, right? Do we want to keep a native app in a cloud backend? Do we want to be like pure cloud, et cetera? and the decision we made, which is one of the questions I'm sure you'll ask me. The decision we made was to stick with a native app and a cloud backend. And so that was the last pivot, so to speak. And now we're, software as a service with recurring revenue, no longer on-premise, no longer license-based. So we've been through a few transitions in terms of the software business models and whatnot. And we have the battle scars to prove it.
I have a number of questions about the pivot to adding a cloud aspect to your system. First, I'm curious, how did the conversation with Apple come about where they said that, hey, maybe you want to sell this?
So what happened was when we were consulting, we showed Daylite as a exhibit of our technical prowess to kind of recruit customers that way. Like, hey, look what we can do, and we can do this for you kind of thing, which, people still do to this day, right? With various things. And so a gentleman at Apple saw that, part of developer relations. His name's Todd Brackett. And he got in touch with us at Macworld, actually, and convinced me to turn it into a product. And so that's how it kind of happened. It happened at Macworld in San Francisco. We used to use a database called OpenBase back then. And so OpenBase was like, hey, look at this, is built on our system. So they were using us as a kind of demo thing. And that's kind of like how Apple got wind of us. And secondly, how they convinced me to turn it into a product.
You're speaking with Steve Jobs directly, I'm sure, through all of those conversations.
I have met Steve Jobs a few times, but that was not with Steve Jobs. That was, well below.
Right. These pivots, it's funny, everything new is old. I forget what the exact saying is, but you started on-prem, moved to the cloud. Now there's a whole movement of people like, yeah, we could just do on-prem. That would be nice. So, the Rails, it's DHH of the world, is like, yeah, on-prem, or like having your own machines at least that you own.
Your own data centers. And to be frank, I think that the motivation behind that is twofold. One of them is that a lot of, everybody's jacking up prices. I mean, we had to do it as well, right? And so when I look at our cloud costs, and we're with DigitalOcean, we're not with Amazon or Azure or whatever. And so it's, DigitalOcean is the cheaper of the bunch. And even then, our cloud cost keeps going up. And I'm like, how do I save money? But then I see that we have so many gazillion instances of this that need to run, and so many gazillion instances of that needs to run. So there is the aspect of the actual cost that these companies keep jacking up. And then there's also the aspect of the technology that you're using, which may or not be efficient, right? So there's two aspects there. And the amount of storage.
Yes.
Storage.
Yeah, everyone needs storage.
Yeah.
I guess if you don't need storage, you can make some, I can imagine some apps that are ephemeral and don't need storage, but yeah, you're going to need some kind of storage. But you've actually segued us right into, I think, what we enjoyed the most, which is talking about Elixir. So the tech that you use really does have a big impact on what you can build, and then what it's going to cost you, both in terms of monthly bills and also just your team, your cost to run the business. And we are an Elixir focused podcast here. It's in the title. So maybe tell us a little bit about what role Elixir is playing, and maybe with, it didn't exist back in 1999. So like, how did this get on your radar?
How did this come about? So it's actually a very interesting story. So let's back up a little bit. We have another product called Billings, which we don't talk about. And our very first foray into the native app and the cloud backend was like early 2010s, 2011s, where we were experimenting with this idea. And what we found was that the architecture, which was pretty pure client server, just would not scale, right? So and our Daylite was built on the same kind of technique, right? And so we realized that if we can't scale this small app, we're not going to scale this big app. And so we set about, figuring that out. And as we were figuring that out, slowly transitioning, And we made I would say a really big decision. And that decision was in like 2013, 2014, we made the decision to go with a microservices architecture. And further to that, we really bought in, we drank the Kool-Aid, me included, right? Not just my engineers, but me included, use the right language for the right job. And, each microservice has its own database, and therefore you shouldn't violate the space of another microservice from another microservice. So we bought into all of that, and we built our backend stack with Python async, because those are two different things, with some Ruby, specifically Rails and Sinatra, right? We built our backend around that, and it worked. And there's a whole bunch of C in there, which which you can get into if you want to. And so we went with this microservices architecture. And the result of that at the beginning is just fine, because you're just making the new stuff, and you're putting this new service up, and you set up Nginx to send this over there and whatnot, and it's all working great. But when it starts to really test your patience and your ability to move is later on, when Dependabot is telling you that there is 500 things that you have to update on this one repo, which is this one small microservice. And then there's another 300 over here, and you go about doing them. And then next week, there's another 400 coming back. I have PTSD with Dependabot. So anyway, so this is the reality, that we have these smaller microservices, but the dependency management on each one and keeping them up to date. And, we do have to make sure that we're not exposing ourselves with very, not only bugs, but security issues. So we work to keep up with all these updates, but then we're doing this for every single one. And every single one has slightly different test systems. And you have to then switch also your mind frame from one language to another language, which has a different test system. And then that language has different frameworks. And even within that, because of you go into the microservices where you use the right tool for the right job, quote unquote, you end up going down these rabbit holes where there's a lot of management that has to happen. And it gets to the point where it's hard to keep up with every, 20, 30 microservices. And of course, you then need a message bus to send stuff between microservices, which if you need guaranteed delivery, which you do a lot of times, you're going to use something like Kafka, which is a beast in itself to kind of manage, right? So all these things start to pile up. And when you're a team of even 20 people or 30 people, it becomes really difficult. The system becomes kind of ossified, because you change something over here, and all of a sudden you didn't realize it's supposed to be independent, but it's not.
Right.
And then, of course, deadlines mean sometimes that you have to take some shortcuts, right? And what is that shortcut? Oh, I'm not going to go through this thing. I'm just going to go directly. And now all of a sudden you have tight coupling between microservices, and you forget about that. And then, a year later you have to do something, and wait a minute, we have this like really hard dependency here. And so that, that this kind of built up, and, we were trying to figure out our way around this spaghetti of microservices and manage them as a small team. Right? Now, if you have a few hundred engineers, that might be a different story, but we don't, right? And so in order to tame this thing, we had to make some let's get rid of a bunch of them and amalgamate some of them. And at that point, Rails was our biggest code base in terms of the application functionality. And so we decided to move some of these things. Now, this is where one of the other things that led me to Elixir came in. So what we do different is we have a native app and we have a cloud backend, right? And one of the features that we sell is that you can work fully offline. So that means we synchronize data back and forth, and we synchronize a lot of data. So some customers have databases in gigabytes, right? And we have to download the offline, so that it's the same state. And we synchronize, and then it's multi-user, so and with multiple devices. So there's a lot of stuff happening. And we accomplish the sync engine using Python with async, so async IO and so forth. And that works. It works. It's not that it doesn't work. Problem is that the other stuff like the Django world doesn't interact well with Python async. So now you really have two separate code bases. They're not together. That's Python to Python.
Right.
Never mind Python to Ruby, right? So what was happening is we were saying, okay, let's amalgamate these other microservices into our main Rails microservice, which will eventually become a monolith, right? But the sync wouldn't fly, right? Because it needed to be highly concurrent and highly fault tolerant. I mean, they was accomplishing that in the Python world, but I'm like, okay, I can't have all these different things. I gotta amalgamate. So then I started looking like, what do other Rails shops do? They must run into this problem. And, I found, what is it called? Falcon, which is supposed to be concurrent, multi-threaded, replace Puma, right? And it's like, well, if you put Falcon in, it becomes slower. I go, no, I need fast. I don't need slow. And then I kept digging into what do other companies do, right? And finally, I found that a bunch of people moved from Rails or augmented Rails or Ruby. It's Ruby, it's not Rails, to Elixir. And then, so basically I found Elixir early this year. It wasn't long ago. And so in that process of identifying that Elixir is possible, meaning because it's highly concurrent, it's fault tolerant, etc., right? Mm-hmm. My thought was that if it can handle, so our sync is really the hardest job of our system. If a environment or language can handle that, then it can handle everything else. Because everything else we could do in Django, we could do in Rails. It's not rocket science. But this particular thing, we needed something, highly concurrent. We even explored using server-side Swift because, we have a lot of Swift developers. So we even explored that, but that ecosystem is it's nascent. I think it'll be fine in the future, but right now there's not much, there are not many frameworks and so forth. The community is small, which in itself is not a problem, but async 08 has been just introduced. And so now Swift 6 is, they're going through the same thing that Python went through with async 08 way back when. I don't have time for that. So we ruled that out, unfortunately, right? And ruled that out. The Ruby world led me to Elixir. I was trying to find a Python equivalent. Not really. And so I ended up with Elixir. That's how I found it. And in that process, actually, I should add, that for every one of our microservices, I went through and I said, can I solve this with Elixir? Like we do, for example, through our Kafka thing, we do change data capture. Can I do that in Elixir? The answer was yes. Can I do this in Elixir? And I went through and I found all the frameworks and I found all the libraries, etc., before making the decision to go forward with Elixir.
We could just vamp on this for another 2 hours because you've raised so many of my hobby horses. I'm not like anti microservices. I just, we've all seen code bases, monoliths,
right.
Microservices. You can produce spaghetti in many different forms, right?
You can produce spaghetti anywhere. You can produce, it's not the language really. It's not the language, but it is the approach and the mentality, the mindset, right?
Well, and you used scare quotes for right tool for the job. And that's like the real hobby horse that long before I was able to actually use Elixir on a daily basis, I was like, but it is the right tool for almost every job, right?
Right.
So like you're looking at these microservices that might be written in a few different languages.
Yeah.
And I would suspect that you're seeing that, okay, yeah, these could almost all be Elixir services, at least, to some degree. Like maybe they need some native code for performance reasons. So maybe there's some Zig or C that still lays around, So
interestingly enough, part of our sync, we have a very specialized encoding to make things efficient. Because on the server side, we got Postgres. On the client side, we're running SQLite. And when we're moving this amount of data, we want the least amount of other junk around it, converting from one type to another type, etc. Right? And so we found a way to use it's a really tiny kind of encoding mechanism. And it's written all in C. Because then we can do it, on the client apps, we can do it on server, we can use C everywhere, right? And one of the things I was exploring was, okay, what do I do? Do I use an if for these things and whatnot? So as I'm thinking about this, I'm going, but that's another dependency. I got to maintain the C thing. And it's not like FFmpeg where I'm doing a big job, right? Where I can, fork this off to something, it takes you multiple seconds or minutes and it comes back. These are like little tiny things that are, milliseconds. And so I decided to kind of explore rewriting the encoding in pure Elixir. For each type, there's about this much C code. There's about 15 lines of C code, let's say 15 for each type, for a date, for a number, for etc. And so that's not a lot, but It's a lot compared to the one line of Elixir. So I got somebody to help me with this because I was new with the whole Elixir thing, right? So I got somebody to help me with this, and he came back with like these one-liners. I'm going like, this can't be right. And literally there are these one-liners because of pattern matching.
Right, binary pattern matching, is that right?
Yeah, because ultimately it's a binary protocol that we have, and it works great. And so the example I'll give you is for one of the databases, one of the clients that we download, it would take in the old system 6 minutes on a high bandwidth kind of network. With the Elixir version, it takes 2 minutes. That's going pure Elixir. So Postgres, pure Elixir, back to SQLite on the other side, versus before it was Postgres to C to Python and then over, right? And so from the Python code, we're calling C like a lot. And from Elixir, okay, maybe Elixir's a little slower, but in terms of certain parts, but overall, I'm going from 6 minutes to 2 minutes. To me, it's an advantage.
Yeah. Can you say that time again? You went from how many minutes to 2 minutes?
So one of an example of a fresh setup of a new machine, you download the data. It takes this one example, it takes 6 minutes. Like most customers, it takes like less than 30 seconds. But in the large customer case, it's like, let's say as an example, 6 minutes. And it also depends where in the world you are. But I'll give this consistent one place is 6 minutes, and in the new system, it's 2 minutes. Right? Maybe 3 minutes, right? Like, what is that, a 50% savings? Or is that 100% savings? How do you calculate that? You go from 6 minutes to 3.
6 to 3, that's 50%.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's 50% of the time, but is that 100% of the savings?
Well, there's a lot of numbers happening now. So I just write code. I would need to pull out a calculator or like open a terminal to answer the question. So this has come up a few times this season. You're talking about syncing and like a sync engine.
Yeah.
It's becoming like, we're going to have bingo cards eventually because we're hearing the same themes. CRDTs, is this part of the equation here, or is there something kind of slightly like similar flavor, but kind of like more custom?
So our algorithm is way older than this idea of CRDTs, right? And in our case, we sync at the field level as opposed to the row level. And our rule is really simple: last edit wins. And so in our use case, for our customers, I have yet to hear a complaint on this one. First of all, we sync super fast if you're online. And so even if somebody changes first name and then you end up changing last name, it'll resolve no problem, right? It's rare that two people in the same company will edit first name of the same record at the same time between syncs. The chance of that happening is so minute that it doesn't make sense for us to optimize for that case, right? Like I have yet, we've been using this algorithm for, what are we now? 6 years, 7 years, something like that. But I've not heard anything on that one. But again, because we're doing field level and our syncs are super fast, and this whole system is so that syncs happen in the milliseconds, with less than a second. So we haven't had to go down the CRDT route.
It sounds like you're following similar patterns, right? Because like each field is atomic or granular enough that, like you say, it's not likely that two people are editing the same exact piece of data.
Right.
You're also, at least that example is not like a document that like 5 people are editing. It's
Correct. We don't do that. Yeah.
a field in a database, right?
Yeah.
So it's last write wins is like the most naive implementation of CRDT, right? Like you've got some data and just whoever put the change in most recently, that's the result.
Yeah.
Do you support like multi-cursor editing in places? Like if someone's editing a large description about a task? No, it's not a thing. Okay.
No. So again, this is where, so our database is highly normalized, and we have a lot of small fields as opposed to, using JSON for, multiple fields in the same record. We don't do that, right? We compose JSONs when you hit our API and whatnot, but when you're working with this stuff, it's field by field. And which is why, again, our system needed to be like super efficient and fast because we do a lot of them. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've been just kind of on the side, kind of going deep on event sourcing, both just through kind of reading up on Commanded, the kind of the de facto framework for this, and then also reading the new real world event sourcing book that's, I think, just out of beta. Will be published in paper soon. That's Prog book. So I think I'm kind of imagining things kind of from the other side. So like your data maybe starts denormalized and then you project out normalized data kind of at the end. You're defining events, commands of structures of data that's going to flow into a pool of events basically. And then you kind of derive aggregates and projections out of that. But I did see that in the features, you do have some like timeline features as well.
Right.
So it sounds like you've got maybe some degree of events happening in the system. Can you speak to the data side a little bit more?
We built that kind of mechanism way before the whole idea of event sourcing. And this is one of our, actually, what you're talking about is one of the features that customers love our product for, right? Is this chronological historical thing where we amalgamate data from multiple sources, meaning really multiple users, etc., into one, chronological history kind of thing. And really, at the end of the day, it's just, again, remember, highly normalized database, they're just sequential rows in a database. Or actually, it's in multiple tables, but we have a little engine that kind of puts them together in what you see. And again, remember that we sync the data over to the client, the Mac, the iPhone, the iPad, etc. And then over there, we have SQLite, and we have our own engine over there that puts all of this together. We have our own persistence layer that puts this together and presents it, and then eventually presents it to the user. So we don't do that kind of event sourcing that you're talking about, where something like in Kafka, where you have certain rules and you're as the events are streaming in. Ours is simpler than that.
It sounds like you've got pretty intimate knowledge of a lot of or all of the pieces of your system. Do you tend to spend a lot of time in the weeds and writing a lot of code, or is it more that it's your job to understand those pieces and how they're fitting together from a higher level?
Well, no, I'm in there. I'm writing code. I'm also on call periodically, so I get woken up in the night. But I do that because to understand the system. Because I don't know if other people can do this. If I don't understand parts of the system, then I can't really make good decisions. And some of these bad decisions that led us down this pipe, the way where we had to kind of rejigger all our microservices, because at that time I was not in the weeds. I was trusting, I delegated that to somebody to do that. And I kept not getting the results that I imagined. And so I'm in there right now. But what I would say is, this is one of the questions that you were going to ask me, is what would I recommend to technical founders or whatnot? And so I'm one of those. I started writing code. I wrote a lot of that version 1.0. I wrote a lot of our persistence layer, this new Elixir sync engine that I wrote it, right? And that's where I get my enjoyment from. I don't get my enjoyment out of doing all the other CEO crap, right? Like I get my enjoyment out of actually like if I didn't do software, I tell this to my wife often, I'd be either building houses or something where I'm building something. I don't, I'm not the other. I like to build stuff.
It comes through in your marketing materials too.
It does, eh?
Oh.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Don't let the business run you kind of message. Yeah.
We do have that bent, and a lot of us are, of the technical background, so to speak. So when it comes to things like marketing, it kind of bleeds through. But our customers aren't like us, but we're certainly like that. I'm certainly like that, and so I make sure that I carve out 2 to 3 hours, kind of a day, to be able to get in the weeds and do something. And sometimes it's just I fix a bug here and there, but I feel great that I fixed the bug, and all the crap I had to deal with prior is erased now because I accomplished something tangible. I can't do big systems or anything like that, but I can do these side things. So that's what I do to keep my sanity and enjoyment. And that's what I would recommend technical founders do, is build around your own superpower, as opposed to, doing the CEO thing and delegating that. It's better to delegate some of the other stuff and find the right people to do so than for you to give up the thing that gives you the energy.
Makes sense.
Great advice. Because this season, we're talking to people building things large and small, right?
Yeah.
Side projects, like proof of concept, kind of prototype things. And then also now multi-decade businesses, which have multiple customers and some really interesting technology. I think another interesting part of Marketcircle and Daylite is that you've got a lot of backend technology. It sounds like you're kind of migrating some of this over time to Elixir, starting with the sync engine, and potentially maybe some other services start to get rolled in and maybe take a different architecture.
That's happening. Like basically I'll go down from, I don't know, however many microservices we have to 3. That's we have the target, and then we'll eventually get there. The way we prioritize that is, it's not practical business wise to just, do the migration and then what we're doing is, as a new feature is required or something, and part of that stuff is in one of the old stacks, we then migrate that at that time and build a new feature together, and then that's deprecated. And for example, with the sync engine, we have some improvements in there, really esoteric stuff, but we have some improvements in there that we're leveraging part of the new build, right? As opposed to just a straight port.
Yeah.
I call it the Theseus approach.
Yes. Yeah. You're replacing, what is it, a board on the ship as it's sailing along, and by the end of the time, is it the same ship that left? That one, right? Yes.
Yeah, after you've replaced all the pieces, and yep.
If only we had a boat guy on the podcast. Speaking of boat guy, Charles, I know you've worked a little bit more on the native app side than I have. I know you've got a project that has an iOS app. My experience mostly is on web-facing apps, sometimes purely back-end projects as well. What's it like? What's it been like deploying Apple-oriented applications that are interacting with this back-end?
Deploying or shipping Apple native apps is an art and black magic unto itself. I don't do that. I have some really good guys that take care of that aspect of it, like all the App Store stuff and these rules and that rules. Like I'm not in there.
Smart.
And they do a good job and they love it. So I leave them to it. But it is a different mindset. For example, when we're talking with our backend stuff, whether it was Elixir or any other thing, we need to make a change. It's out in 30 seconds, right? Versus when we need to deploy through the App Store, we have, submit, review process, and then out. It can be pretty short. Like it used to be much longer and it's now much shorter. So it's not terrible, but it's not the same. The unit of work is typically bigger than the unit of work that you ship on the back end. Because on the back end, you can, we're literally shipping 10 times a day. We can actually, we don't do that per se, but we can do that easily on the back end. We have a CI pipeline and it takes us 6 minutes to run through all the tests and deploy, right? That's way shorter than going through the App Store review process.
Was there a reason you chose? I mean, I guess you've got a lot of history with Apple hardware.
Mhm.
Was there a reason that you chose to stick with only building for Apple hardware?
That's a very good question. The intent was not to just stay exclusively Apple. So we have these native apps. They're deep in the sense of the functionality that they have is deep. So we're not going to replace those apps, but that doesn't mean we can't augment that with some web stuff, right? And so that's always been the vision. It's just that with that whole microservices nonsense that we had, it was difficult for us to do some of these things. But that is the ultimate, where there'll be augmentation. You'll still use the native apps, right? But there'll be augmentation with some web stuff. And so to answer your question is, why did we stick with that, or why did we stay there? Really, it was a case of, I felt that native apps are a better experience than web apps. Writing a Windows app and a Mac app is difficult, so I just chose to write the Mac app or the Apple ecosystem. Even within the Apple ecosystem, you have Swift, you have Objective-C, you have, iPad, you have iOS, and then you have, the Mac, and they're a little bit different in subtle ways and sometimes in big ways. And it's hard to manage that ecosystem by itself, never mind another one, right? And who wants an Electron app? So,
Yeah.
Apple, they have, I'm not an Apple developer, so I forget the name of this thing, but maybe it was part of Swift a few years ago. They said, all right, here's a new way of making apps. They're cross-compatible with iPhone, and you build once and it,
or the Swift UI kind of thing.
Right. And what I'm seeing is that even some of the apps that Apple has made are just not holding up, right? So Apple Music.
Oh, Apple Music is a terrible example.
I have an Apple Music subscription because there's so much music that I can get only there.
Yeah.
And I have to restart it frequently just so I can actually use the interface, right?
Right.
Is that the type of thing you've been running into, or is it maybe you're better building apps than Apple is? I don't know. Are there growing pains with that?
So it's hard for me to talk about the music app in itself. Like other Apple apps, if you look at Pages or Numbers or Keynote or any of those, you don't see the same problems that the music app has. So the music app seems to be unique in itself. So I don't know if the team there has chosen. I know it's been through many transmutations. Remember, it used to be iTunes, and then in iTunes It was everything, and then they stripped out the music stuff. And I know that, for example, WebObjects, one of the technologies I was familiar with back in the day, was still driving some of that stuff. And they have their own kind of language for, like an ML type of language. To what you see on the screen is its own music-specific kind of layout language, right? So I don't know if it's all that stuff that they haven't been able to keep up with. I'm not sure the story, but I feel your pain, because I have this, I basically, when I'm working, I like to have some music. And so I would use the music app on my Mac here, and I end up frustrated. I quit it and I use it for my phone. And I, do use AirPlay to my speakers because of the native app is so terrible. And how come the phone app itself doesn't have the same kinds of problems, right? It works. So I don't know. I think that app it's not indicative of all the other Apple apps. I think it's its own kind of issue.
I can empathize. So I did not make this app. I've made apps that, would struggle sometimes. So I'm not here to throw shade too hard at, at the Apple developers who made that thing.
When it comes to technology, a lot of times you make a decision based on that, the information you have at the time and the constraints you have at the time. And, 2 years later, it could have been the wrong decision, but you didn't know at that time. You had no choice, right? I mean, it's not you didn't have a choice. You didn't know at the time. So it is what it is. You have to kind of fix it and move on, either by tossing it out or fixing it, right? One or the other.
Well, and we talked about this earlier, the tech ecosystem just churns.
Massive churn, yeah.
Fortunately for us, not super fast in the Elixir land. Like we get more tools fairly regularly, and that's really nice. But it's not like JavaScript where frameworks every month,
That is one of the reasons, one of the checkbox items for me for picking Elixir, is that the language itself is not overly complicated, right? So that means that if you put your mind to it, you can become really good at it, because it isn't if you look at Swift, every version of Swift has all kinds of new stuff, and it's gobbledygook sometimes, right? Yes, it does great things, but at the same time, it's hard for you to wrap your mind around it. If you, in retrospect, if you look at Objective-C didn't change too much, so you could build, you have a stable foundation to work on, and whatever you build on top of that can last. It's not always changing. Swift, on the other hand, has been, even though the Apple provides all the various tooling to refactor and so forth, it's been somewhat painful, right? Since 5.0, it's been a lot better. But prior to the ABI stability, it was a bit of a painful scenario. Elixir is good because it is simple, and it's not too, I'm not sure, other than the typing, the gradual typing stuff, I'm not sure what I would add to it.
Same.
So that's great, because that means that even if you bring in new developers, it's easy for them to get productive and therefore happy. Because if you're always struggling, you're not going to be happy with it, right?
Yeah.
Whatever language it is.
Are you using any Elixir on the Mac hardware, on client devices? Have you looked at doing that at all?
That's just pure Objective-C and Swift.
Okay. Have you looked at LiveView Native at all?
I have. In fact, I attended the LiveView Native workshop at ElixirConf, and we did evaluate whether we should use or shouldn't use LiveView. But the thing is that we've developed enough stuff prior to LiveView that it doesn't make sense for us at this point in time, right? That may not be always true, but so I'm keeping an eye on it. But at this time, it's, we have all kinds of JSON encoding, blah, 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 it's not difficult we're used to a certain kind of workflow. So at this point in time, we're not thinking about it. That doesn't mean that won't change. It's still one of the, to be reevaluated. It's very interesting the way they approached it, as opposed to a React Native kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with LiveView Native, you can probably do better apps, or apps that feel more, that belong on a platform.
Yeah, I think what's intriguing to me about LiveView Native is that I do vaguely remember that there's maybe still going to be some duplication. You might need some templates to be duplicated between web and native.
Yeah.
But at least maybe your components could be largely shared, so you would have a smaller kind of code base in terms of what you have to maintain to deliver an experience across multiple devices. I don't envy the team that's working on that, because I saw that even, Android Studio, I think Dan Abramoff has been skeeting. If you're on Blue Sky, he's been skeeting about the performance issues on Android Studio.
Right.
And I know that building a tool that can deploy a native app to multiple platforms has got to be maybe one of the hardest problems to solve.
It is. And I think their approach. So let's zoom out a little bit and look at the prior approaches, like the React Natives, and there's been a number of tools that have tried the lowest common denominator thing, Electron, right? And none of these apps, that they're not native to your platform. And so you have to work with the lowest common denominator, and it's not great. So eventually you get frustrated, and you're always battling the native frameworks on that platform, whether it's Android or Apple, it doesn't matter. And so the way that Dockyard has approached LiveView Native is interesting to me, because yes, there is the fact that you might duplicate some of those templates, but those are just templates. Your business logic is the same, right? So, and the templates then, because they're a little bit different by platform, that allows you to be more native, So I think it's a good strategy, and I'm certainly keeping my eye out on that. I think it's a better strategy than some of the other ones. The trade-off is you have the multiple templates.
Yeah. I'm a mostly happy iPhone user. I do wonder if maybe we'd be better off if WebOS would have won. I really loved my Palm Pre when it still worked. Sliding the thing up and down all day. It was so nice. But,
Yeah, it's unfortunate that some of these technologies didn't come through. It really is, because there were some good ideas there.
Mini disk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just cards.
Yeah, there's some good ideas there. And I'm sure, they've stolen a few ideas. Apple has stolen a few ideas.
It is nice they've kind of like graduated up into, iOS and Android
Right.
ecosystems.
Right.
We're running a little bit low on time. We could probably go on for another hour.
Oh, we can easily, I can talk your ear off about a lot of other things.
Well, we always love to talk shop and hear about, especially businesses, people, wielding Elixir in interesting ways. And so it's been a fun conversation, I guess. Before we wrap up, do you have kind of any future plans you'd like to share, where you want to take Daylite next, and maybe what role Elixir might play in that?
The role that Elixir, at least for the next number of months, is really in the background. Nobody's going to know or see it. It's going to be just for our quality of life that it's there. People won't, other than the people that are getting 2-minute downloads as opposed to 6, right? They won't notice. But then that's such a rare event for them, like individually, like collectively, we're getting, this is happening all the time. We currently have about 50% of our customers on the Elixir stuff. And we're gradually moving them if we're finding any issues. Because this is new to us, right? So we don't know how to wield the beam yet, especially at this kind of load, right? Like it's not easy. And we're working with Alembic, who's kind of helping us kind of navigate these situations as we run into them. It's like, wow, we don't know what to do. And so it's been, Zach and so forth. It's been great to be able to lean on them, because we're going basically from 0 to 1. Like the original plan was not to put the sync engine. It was just more like a proof of concept. If this can work, then everything else can work. And we can do some new features in that. And then over time, but then I'm not going to go into those details, but we ran into problems with the Python stuff, and we said, okay, well, let's just move it now so we're gradually moving our customers over, monitoring things, making sure that stuff doesn't fall down. And that's what we're doing right now. It's all in the background. People won't really see it. And then maybe in the future, second half of 2025 or something, there might be some stuff that they're interacting with that they won't realize is Elixir. So that's kind of like the kind of roadmap for that. The other stuff, the native apps, we have some features planned there, and it's more native. The Elixir stuff supports it in the background. It's kind of hard to explain, but it does that. So it's really our quality of life and cost, right? So I remember I was telling you about the number of services that we have to ramp up and so forth. We have so many instances running. So it looks like at the moment, for that 50% of customers that we've moved over, we've halved the number of instances that we got to run. But again, we haven't, we still don't know what we're doing exactly. We're still learning. So we might be able to even, we might need even a third of what we used to need.
Are any of the customers that you've moved over heavier users that would be putting more intense load on the servers, or?
Some of them, not all of them. We've kind of like mixed it up so that we don't have any one kind of load. We have different kinds of load. So they're mixed up.
Okay. So for the Elixir community, I just had an idea. We've been talking about this Elixir backend native front end. I think I'm gonna attempt to coin something, and let's see if we can make this happen. Okay.
Okay.
We're gonna call this the ElixirMullet. It's native in the front and party in the back. So,
oh man!
All right, you heard it, folks. ElixirMullet. Let's make this happen. Hashtag. So when people are hashtagging ElixirMullet, where would they find you?
They'll be talking about you.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna have to grow my mullet now. So yeah, we love to ask for plugs, where people find you. I guess now the question is, are you on Blue Sky yet?
I am on Blue Sky. I'm mostly a lurker. I don't tend to post too much. I'm not on social media too much. I probably should be more, but I am on there. I'm on LinkedIn. You can probably find me more on LinkedIn than anywhere else. On Blue Sky, I think I'm Jetha at social Blue, whatever that thing is. But I am there. It's just I'm not vocal.
Gotcha. All right. And then where do we find more about Marketcircle and Daylite?
So marketcircle.com is the company website, and daylite.app is the application. It still currently goes to marketcircle.com, but eventually that'll separate a little bit. You can also find me, my full name, Alykhan Jetha, on LinkedIn, and Jetha, I believe, on Blue Sky. Tells you how, social media thing is now because I don't even know my handle. So there you go.
Right. Well, you'll be forgiven for not remembering your handle. It's, the social networks are a mess, right? They've only gotten messier in the past few years. So,
and a big distraction, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you can go down rabbit holes then.
What? I didn't hear you. No. Okay. Well, all right. Jokes aside, it's been a really fun conversation. We always love talking shop and everything. So thank you, AJ, for joining us here on Elixir Wizards.
Thank you for having me. It was a great talk. It was great meeting you guys at ElixirConf. And I look forward to seeing you guys again.
All right. Great. Thanks for coming.
Let's go mullet crew.
Hashtag mullet.
ElixirMullet. It'll be a very different conversation.
I like that one. ElixirMullet.